"Mr. Brooks, your blood pressure is dangerously high, and you're showing alarming neurological symptoms. You need to get to the hospital immediately." Anna Washington's gentle yet firm voice cut through the tense silence of the meeting in the vast, luxurious mansion. The Brooks family's grand living room was bathed in golden light from massive crystal chandeliers hanging from the high ceiling. Heavy red velvet drapes cascaded down the tall windows, adding to the opulent grandeur of the multi-million-dollar estate. In the midst of this splendor, Richard Brooks, the billionaire CEO of a leading pharmaceutical company, sat at the head of a critical online meeting with the board of directors. Anna stood just inside the doorway, clutching a mop and a tray of drinks. Her anxious eyes were fixed on Richard. In her 2 years working for the Brooks family, she had never seen him like this before. His hands trembled as he held the documents, his voice occasionally faltered, and his gaze darted around the room as if searching for something he couldn't quite see. Richard quickly wiped the sweat from his forehead and snapped irritably, "Anna, I didn't hire you to play doctor. I hired you to be a maid. Your job is to clean, not diagnose." The board members, visible on the large screen in the center of the room, remained silent, clearly uncomfortable, but unwilling to speak up against Richard's sharp tone. Anna lowered her head slightly, but stood her ground. "I'm sorry, sir, but these symptoms are serious. You're showing clear signs of a neurological—" "Enough!" Richard barked, cutting her off harshly. Anna instinctively stepped back, startled by the sudden outburst. His face flushed red with anger, his eyes cold and disdainful. "Who do you think you are to stand here and talk about my health? A black maid with no education, no medical credentials giving me medical advice?" A chilling silence fell over the room. His venomous words cut deep, but Anna had long since learned how to endure such blows. She took a deep breath, steadying the tremor in her hands. "My apologies for disturbing you," she replied softly, keeping her voice calm and polite, though her heart ached with every word. Richard waved her away without another glance, resuming his meeting as though nothing had happened. Leaving the lavish room, Anna could feel the watchful eyes of the other household staff. Some whispered to each other, a few chuckled quietly, casting her glances that mixed curiosity with pity. They had all heard the insult. She walked toward the kitchen, her mind heavy. She knew exactly what those symptoms meant. Before becoming a maid, Anna had been an experienced nurse in the neurology department of a prestigious New York hospital. But life had been cruel, and racial prejudice had stolen her career and reputation in the blink of an eye. Standing at the sink, Anna quietly wiped the tears from her reddened eyes. She asked herself whether she should walk away or continue fighting silently to protect the life of a man who was arrogant and openly prejudiced toward her. "Anna, why did you have to provoke the boss?" came a voice from behind, startling her. It was Mary, the longtime cook. "I just wanted to warn him," Anna replied softly. "He's truly in danger." "But you know he'll never listen to people like us," Mary sighed. "In this house, we're invisible." Anna said nothing more. She knew the bitter truth in Mary's words, but her heart wouldn't let her abandon Richard. Prejudice and contempt could not erase the Hippocratic oath she had once sworn. That night, in her small basement room, Anna carefully opened her notebook, recording every symptom she had observed. July 14th. Richard Brooks shows signs of hand tremors, short-term memory loss, irritability, mild speech disorder, high probability of progressive neurological disease. She sighed, knowing she would likely endure more humiliation from Richard. But if she gave up, the powerful man upstairs might pay with his life. In his opulent penthouse bedroom, Richard lay awake, staring at the ornate ceiling, recalling Anna's words. For a fleeting moment, doubt crept in, but he quickly brushed it aside. What would a maid know about medicine? He muttered with disdain, closing his eyes to push away the growing unease. He didn't know that from this moment forward his life had begun veering toward a tragic turning point. The small signs he had ignored would soon spiral into a nightmare, and the only person who could save him was the woman he had insulted and dismissed. Downstairs in her dim little room, Anna slipped the notebook into her drawer and whispered with quiet determination, "No matter how much he despises me, I will save him, because life leaves no room for hatred or pride." But would a man as proud as Richard Brooks heed Anna's warning before it was too late? The soft glow of dawn slowly filtered through the small basement window, pulling Anna from the haunting dreams of a past she had tried to bury for so many years. She sat up, rubbing her eyes as she looked around the modest, sparsely furnished room. So far removed from the lavish mansion above that she cleaned every day. Her hand instinctively reached for the notebook resting on the table beside her bed. The notes she had written about Richard's symptoms from the day before still lingered vividly in her mind. Richard Brooks, hand tremors, memory loss, mild confusion. High probability of progressive neurological damage. She whispered the words to herself, as if reminding her own heart that the medical knowledge and instincts she once lived by were still alive within her, even if buried beneath years of dust, prejudice, and silence. A chime from upstairs jolted her into motion. She slipped on her faded maid's uniform, ready to begin another day with quiet resolve. Anna knew her duties here were more than just cleaning and serving meals. Deep inside, she believed fate had placed her in this house for a reason. When she stepped into the dining room, she saw Richard seated at the grand breakfast table with his wife, Margaret Brooks, a woman who had always treated Anna politely, but had never once intervened when her husband insulted her. Richard glanced at Anna, his eyes immediately darkening with irritation. He said nothing, focusing on his breakfast as though her presence alone spoiled his appetite. Anna lowered her head, carefully set the tea tray on the table, and quietly retreated to the kitchen, where Mary was busy preparing the family's breakfast. "Anna, you okay?" Mary asked gently, catching the hint of sadness in her sigh. "I'm fine," Anna replied softly, her gaze distant. Mary didn't press further. She knew Anna kept her past to herself. But the truth was, Anna's story was far more than that of a maid enduring quiet discrimination. 5 years earlier, Anna Washington had been the head nurse at St. Thomas Hospital, one of New York's most prestigious medical institutions. She was known for her dedication, deep medical expertise, and fierce advocacy for her patients. But her entire life had collapsed when she dared to speak out against injustice and racial bias in the hospital. She had discovered that the head of her department, Dr. Mitchell Barnes, was prescribing opioid painkillers in a disturbingly biased way. Patients of color were consistently given much lower doses than white patients with identical symptoms. Outraged by this blatant discrimination, Anna meticulously documented every case, compiling over 200 pages of medical records, and reported the matter to the hospital's board. The internal meeting that followed was tense and charged. Anna could still remember the cold, mocking look in Barnes's eyes as she presented her report. "So, you're accusing a respected doctor like me of racial bias?" he asked, his voice dripping with scorn. "I'm simply presenting the facts based on 15 years of medical experience and clear clinical data, Doctor," Anna replied firmly. "And who's going to believe you, a black nurse, over me, a doctor with over 20 years of experience, and one of this hospital's largest donors?" Barnes smirked, his contempt unmasked. As he predicted, the investigation quickly turned into a nightmare. Instead of reviewing the detailed evidence she had provided, the hospital built a false narrative around her. She was accused of disrupting internal operations, having severe psychological issues, and deliberately misrepresenting facts due to personal bias. The lies grew bolder. Some even tried to frame her for violating medication protocols. There was no real proof, but the malicious rumors were enough to destroy her career and reputation. Within 6 months, Anna had lost everything: her nursing license, her livelihood, her honor, and her faith in justice. On the day she cleared out her locker, Barnes passed by, gave her a cruel smile, and whispered, "Some places just aren't meant for you, Anna. Stop fighting destiny." Anna said nothing. She knew her life had been shattered because she stood up for patients of color, but she felt no regret for doing so. Still, the wound of that injustice never stopped aching in the years that followed. Back in the present, Anna stood by the kitchen window, quietly observing Richard from afar. Despite his insults and disdain, she continued to record every symptom with care. Not out of sympathy for the prejudiced man, but because she could never turn her back on a patient whose life was in danger. In her eyes burned determination, and in her heart lived a silent promise. She would not give up, no matter the scorn or humiliation. For beneath her faded uniform, she was still the devoted nurse she had always been, committed to protecting the health of those in need, even if that person had inflicted her deepest wounds. But could a man like Richard Brooks, with his cold heart and towering pride, ever recognize Anna's true worth before it was too late? Or would his ego and prejudice drive him toward the most painful tragedy of his life? In the days that followed, Richard's health began to deteriorate noticeably. Anna Washington quietly monitored even the smallest changes in his behavior, carefully recording each symptom in her small notebook. She did so in silence, discreetly, making sure no one else knew. Richard was becoming increasingly irritable and unpredictable. Once a sharp and decisive man, he now made frequent small mistakes, forgot meeting schedules, repeated nonsensical phrases, or completely lost focus during important discussions. But what worried Anna most was how his demeanor had grown more aggressive and confrontational, especially toward her. One Friday afternoon, the Brooks family held an important gathering in the mansion's grand living room to discuss the company's expansion plans. Margaret Brooks, Richard's wife, sat beside him, her face a mask of concern hidden beneath a forced calm. Their daughter, Jessica, had just returned from medical school to attend the critical meeting. Anna stood quietly in a corner of the room, preparing tea and light refreshments. She worked as discreetly as possible, trying to avoid drawing Richard's attention. But the moment he heard her footsteps, his brow furrowed in irritation. "You again, Anna? I don't need you hovering around here bothering everyone. Get out!" "Richard." Margaret's voice was soft, but carried an edge of embarrassment at her husband's overly harsh reaction. He ignored her completely, his gaze fixed on Anna with open hostility. "Didn't you hear me? Get out of here right now," he barked, his voice echoing through the room, making everyone startle. Anna swallowed hard, her eyes downcast. "I'm sorry, sir," she said quietly. She quickly left the room, though she could still hear the muffled chuckles of a few senior executives. Their mocking laughter cut deep, but she knew she couldn't give up, not now, not when Richard's illness was becoming impossible to ignore. She lingered just outside the hallway, close enough to hear the discussion inside. Through the narrow gap in the door, she observed Richard closely, committing every detail to memory. He began presenting the company's expansion plan, but within minutes his speech faltered. His voice was hesitant, stammering, and his thoughts no longer followed a coherent thread. I think we should expand into. He stopped abruptly, his eyes wandering around the room with a vacant, disoriented look. Jessica quickly spoke up, trying to help him. "Dad, you mean the European market, right? You mentioned it to me yesterday." Richard turned to her with a strange, bewildered expression, his brow furrowing. "Who are you to call me Dad?" The room fell into a stunned, icy silence. Jessica's face drained of color, her eyes wide in disbelief. "Dad, it's me, Jessica, your daughter," she said shakily, her voice cracking. Richard slammed his hand down on the table. "I don't know any Jessica. Stop talking nonsense. Margaret, who is this woman you brought here?" Margaret fought to keep her composure, her voice trembling as she tried to calm him. "Richard, this is Jessica, our daughter. You're confused. Please, just take a breath." But he refused to listen. He shot up from his seat, momentarily losing his balance, before shouting with renewed anger, "I'm not confused. You're all insane. I would never forget my own daughter." He stormed out of the meeting, staggering as he left, abandoning both his family and his senior team in a state of utter shock. From the hallway, Anna had witnessed everything. Her hands trembled with concern. For the first time, the pain Richard had caused her seemed insignificant compared to the tragedy unfolding inside him. And yet, instead of anger or satisfaction, she felt only a deep, quiet sorrow for a man who was losing himself, piece by piece. That night, in the dim light of her small basement room, Anna wrote another entry in her notebook. July 20th, Richard failed to recognize his daughter Jessica during the family meeting. Severe confusion, high agitation, neurological disease likely at a critical stage. She stared at the words, her heart heavy. She knew now that saving Richard was no longer just a moral obligation rooted in her past as a nurse. It had become a fight against prejudice, against his own pride and misguided sense of superiority. But no matter how compassionate her heart might be, she couldn't forget the cruel insults and mocking stares he had once thrown her way. She wasn't trying to save Richard out of pity, nor out of some naive sense of forgiveness. She was doing it because, deep down, she was still the person she had chosen to be, a defender of life and justice, no matter the personal cost. The question now was whether Richard could face the truth and accept her help before the disease consumed his mind and his life. Or would his pride and prejudice push him into an irreversible tragedy, leaving him lost forever in the darkness of ignorance and arrogance? The answer would have to come from Richard himself, the man now standing on the razor's edge between life and death, between hollow pride and his final chance at redemption. In the days following that disastrous family meeting, the atmosphere in the Brooks mansion grew more suffocating than ever. Richard avoided everyone, locking himself away in his private office on the top floor, leaving both family and corporate matters for Margaret to handle. Everyone could sense something was deeply wrong, but no one dared to speak up. They feared the unpredictable wrath of the powerful man. Anna witnessed it all in silence. She continued to carry out her household duties as usual, but her mind never strayed far from what had happened. The symptoms Richard was displaying had now reached a dangerously advanced stage. Even a single day's delay could lead to irreversible consequences. She knew she had to act, but she also knew Richard would never accept medical advice from her, a woman he regarded as inferior and unworthy. There was only one way left to save his life: appeal to the only person in the household who might hold any influence over him. Margaret Brooks, his wife, and a former nurse. That evening, after finishing her work, Anna returned to her small basement room. In the dim light of an old desk lamp, she sat down and began to write a letter, anonymous but filled with precise details about Richard's symptoms, the kind only someone with a medical background could observe and describe so accurately. She chose her words with surgical precision, drawing on over 15 years of medical experience. Dear Mrs. Margaret Brooks, I am writing to you as someone who has closely observed Mr. Richard Brooks's recent health condition. I know this may seem sudden, but I must warn you, without immediate medical intervention, his life could be in serious danger. Over the past few weeks, Mr. Brooks has consistently shown signs of progressive neurological damage, worsening hand tremors, rapid short-term memory loss, severe confusion, and even an inability to recognize his own daughter during the recent family meeting. These are highly concerning symptoms, possibly indicating a brain tumor or cerebral aneurysm. I strongly urge you to take him for a medical evaluation immediately. Time is against him. Please do not delay. Anna read the letter several times, making sure no critical detail was missing. When satisfied, she placed it carefully in a plain white envelope without a return address. Tomorrow, that letter would be in Margaret's hands. She hoped, no matter how faint the chance, that it might awaken the former nurse's professional instincts. The next morning, Anna discreetly placed the envelope on Margaret's desk while she was out for her morning exercise. Her heart pounded, half with fear, half with hope. A few hours later, Margaret sat in the living room, holding the letter in tense silence. She understood all too well the gravity behind the words. With her medical background, she recognized the clinical accuracy woven into each sentence. Whoever had written it had been watching Richard far more closely than she realized. By late afternoon, Margaret decided to confront Richard directly. She found him in his office and gently set the letter down in front of him. "Richard, you need to read this. Someone has confirmed what I've been suspecting. Your condition is serious. Please, I'm begging you, go to the hospital for a checkup right away." Richard glanced at the letter, his expression skeptical. After skimming a few lines, he let out a mocking laugh. "Margaret, you actually believe this nonsense? Who wrote this ridiculous thing? Your maid? Or someone trying to ruin my reputation?" Margaret's face tightened with frustration. "This isn't the time for jokes. I was a nurse. I can see the problem. You need to get checked immediately." Richard slammed his hand on the desk, making her flinch. "I'm not going anywhere. There's nothing wrong with me, and don't you dare bring this up again." "Richard," Margaret's voice trembled, hurt. "You're not only risking your life, you're tearing this family apart. This family is under stress because you and that delusional daughter of ours keep insisting I'm sick. Get out of my office, now," he shouted, pointing at the door. Margaret left, tears streaming down her cheeks. Out in the hallway, Anna had overheard the entire exchange. She turned away, her chest aching, not just from witnessing Margaret's helplessness, but from Richard's ruinous stubbornness. That night, the mansion felt colder than ever. Anna sat by the small window in her room, staring at the pale moonlight outside. She couldn't stop wondering, had her letter only made things worse, or was it the necessary first step in saving a man who was slipping further into illness and denial? No matter how much scorn or humiliation she endured, Anna knew she couldn't give up. She would bear it all, because in her heart lived a vow, an oath to heal, that nothing and no one could ever break. But would Richard awaken to the truth before it was too late? Or would pride and prejudice drag him into a tragedy from which there would be no return? The next morning, the Brooks mansion was steeped in a suffocating, tense silence. Anna stepped out of her room, her heart heavy after the failure of the anonymous letter she had sent to Margaret. Though the weight of helplessness gnawed at her, she kept her face composed as she went about her daily chores. As she moved into the back garden to clean the outdoor table and chairs, Anna happened to see an older woman walking a small dog past the fence. It was Patricia Williams, a neighbor from the mansion next door. Anna had seen her a few times before, but had never had a real conversation with her. Suddenly, the little dog yanked the leash out of Patricia's hand and darted straight into the Brooks' yard, barking excitedly. Patricia hurried after it, calling out an apology. "I'm so sorry. My dog's being naughty and bothering you." "It's no problem at all, ma'am," Anna replied warmly, smiling kindly. She bent down to pick up the dog and handed it back to Patricia. As Patricia stepped closer to take the dog, her eyes fell on the small notebook Anna was holding, a page of medical notes unintentionally visible. She glanced at it, then looked at Anna in surprise. "Excuse me, but are you taking notes on neurological symptoms?" Anna froze for a moment, quickly closing the notebook. But the perceptive look in Patricia's eyes told her there was no use hiding it. She let out a soft sigh. "Yes, I used to be a neurology nurse before I started working here." Patricia's curiosity deepened, and she seemed to piece together why Anna was hesitant. She smiled encouragingly. "I'm Patricia Williams, a retired neurologist. Perhaps we could have a little chat?" A spark of unexpected joy warmed Anna's chest, easing her long-held sense of isolation. She nodded and invited Patricia to sit at the freshly cleaned outdoor table. Within minutes, Patricia could tell Anna's medical knowledge was both deep and precise. She was impressed by Anna's careful, detail-oriented observations. "How long have you worked in medicine, Anna?" Patricia asked. 15 years, ma'am. I was head nurse at St. Thomas Hospital, but Anna trailed off, her expression shadowed with sadness. Patricia caught the pain in Anna's eyes and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "I understand. The medical world can be cruel to those who speak up for what's right. But you've kept your professional instincts alive. That's admirable." Anna met Patricia's gaze with deep gratitude. For the first time in years, she felt genuine empathy from someone in the medical field. "So, whose symptoms have you been observing in this house?" Patricia asked seriously. Anna hesitated, then decided to tell the truth. "Richard Brooks. He's been showing severe neurological symptoms but keeps denying it and refuses treatment. I've tried to warn them, but no one will listen." Patricia frowned, pressing for more details. Anna described what she had seen, and the two quickly fell into a professional discussion, covering possibilities like a brain tumor or cerebral aneurysm. "What you've described is very clear," Patricia concluded gravely. "There's a high likelihood he's dealing with a brain tumor or an aneurysm, both dangerous if left untreated." Anna nodded in agreement, her voice heavy with worry. "I know. But there's no way I can convince him or his family. They'll never trust someone like me." Patricia was silent for a moment, then laid her hand firmly on the table. "Then I'll help you. We need to make Margaret understand how serious this is. She used to be a nurse. She'll grasp the danger better than anyone." Anna looked at Patricia, her heart filling with hope, though doubt lingered. But will she listen? I sent her an anonymous letter before, and it completely failed. Richard wouldn't hear a word of it. "We'll try again," Patricia said with unwavering resolve. "This time, I'll speak to her directly. As a retired neurologist, an outside medical voice will carry much more weight." It felt to Anna as though new strength was coursing through her veins. At last, she had a true ally, someone who not only understood the medical realities but could also help her push back against Richard's dangerous pride and prejudice. The two women exchanged a look of firm determination, knowing they were stepping into a difficult but necessary battle. Anna understood this move carried serious risks, but it might be the only chance to save the life of the arrogant man who had mistreated and belittled her for years. The biggest question now was, Could this unexpected alliance between Anna and Patricia reach Margaret in time to change her mind and save Richard before the disease advanced beyond anyone's control? Just a few days after Anna's unexpected meeting with Patricia, the atmosphere in the Brooks household grew even darker. Richard, though still trying to conceal his condition, could no longer mask the growing suspicion in the eyes of his wife and daughter. Jessica Brooks, recently returned from medical school, quickly noticed the unusual changes in her father. A promising final-year student, Jessica had inherited her mother Margaret's sharp mind and keen eye for medical symptoms. That evening at dinner, she watched her father closely, her eyes never leaving the slight tremor in his hands as he gripped his utensils, the occasional hesitation in his speech, and his alarming lack of focus. "Dad, have you been feeling unwell lately? Anything out of the ordinary?" Jessica asked, her voice a blend of care and seriousness. Richard looked up sharply, a flicker of confusion in his eyes before his usual coldness returned. "You're starting now, too. Your mother's been pestering me enough, and now it's your turn?" Jessica frowned, lowering her voice gently. "I'm only concerned about your health. You have some clear symptoms that could indicate a serious neurological problem. I think you should get checked as soon as possible." Richard slammed his utensils onto the table, his face flushing red with anger, eyes narrowing at Jessica. "I'll say this once. I am not sick, and you are not to bring this up again in this house. Understood?" Margaret, who had been silent until now, spoke up, her tone full of worry. "Richard, Jessica's right. I know you don't want to hear it, but we can't just pretend everything's fine." Richard shot up from his chair, knocking his plate to the floor. The shattering porcelain echoed sharply, startling everyone. "I've had enough, Margaret. I'm sick of your nagging and your daughters. I'm the head of this house, and no one will force me to do anything." He stormed out of the dining room, slamming the door behind him, leaving Margaret and Jessica exchanging looks of disappointment and helplessness. From the corner of the room, Anna stood silently, like a shadow, witnessing everything. Her heart ached at the sight of the two women's frustration as they tried to save him. But instead of despair, she felt her determination strengthen. She couldn't give up now. That night, she carefully opened her small notebook and recorded the latest observations. July 25th. Richard displayed severe anger, overreacted to suggestions of medical evaluation from wife and daughter. Hand tremors increased, memory deterioration significant. Family clearly in crisis. Urgent medical intervention needed. Meanwhile, Margaret sought Jessica out in the living room. The young woman sipped her tea quietly before speaking. "Mom, Dad's in real danger. I've never seen him this out of control. I think we might need to do something more drastic." Margaret nodded gravely. "I received an anonymous letter not long ago detailing your father's symptoms in a very precise way. At first, I thought it was a joke, but now I'm certain the writer has deep medical knowledge. Those symptoms are real and dangerous." Jessica's eyes widened. "When did you get this letter? Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Your father dismissed it immediately," Margaret sighed. "But now I think we have to act, whether he wants to or not." As Anna passed by, she caught fragments of their conversation. Her pulse quickened, a flicker of hope lighting in the darkness. Perhaps, finally, her quiet work was beginning to reach the Brooks family. Over the following week, tensions inside the mansion mounted. Richard spoke little to his wife and daughter, and every time they mentioned a checkup, he erupted in furious outbursts. The atmosphere grew taut, like a stretched wire ready to snap, and everyone tried to keep their distance from him. Anna continued her careful surveillance, recording every sign. Sudden dizziness, disorientation in familiar hallways, forgetting the password to his personal computer he used daily. That afternoon, she met Patricia again in the back garden and quickly shared the latest developments. Patricia listened, her expression growing more serious. "This situation is truly alarming. We don't have much time left. If he keeps refusing treatment, he could suffer a sudden, irreversible complication." Anna sighed, worry etched in her voice. "What else can I do, doctor?" "Patricia?" Patricia's eyes were firm with resolve. "Keep documenting every symptom, no matter how small. Every piece of evidence matters. I'll prepare a plan to speak directly with Margaret and Jessica. This time, I believe we can persuade them." Anna nodded with determination. She understood that the fight against Richard's prejudice, stubbornness, and pride had reached a critical stage. His life, the fate of the Brooks family, and her own dignity were now on the line. But the question remained, would Anna's quiet sacrifices be enough to awaken the Brooks family before it was too late? Or would Richard's unyielding arrogance drag them all into a crisis from which there would be no return? After many sleepless nights wrestling with her thoughts, Margaret decided she could no longer stand by and watch Richard destroy himself. With secret help from her daughter Jessica, she planned a special gathering at the Brooks estate, inviting key members of the company's board of directors. On the surface, it was a meeting to discuss new business strategies. In truth, it was something else entirely, a health intervention Richard would never see coming. Anna quietly observed and discreetly assisted Margaret with preparations, her heart tight with worry. She knew this meeting might be the last chance to save a man who seemed determined to endanger his own life. That evening, the mansion's main sitting room was set up with meticulous care. The large wooden table was draped in crisp white linen, and on it lay medical files that Jessica and Margaret had gathered in secret, alongside a preliminary report from Patricia Williams, the respected retired neurologist. One by one, the senior board members arrived, their faces serious. Each had been discreetly informed by Margaret of the meeting's true purpose. Richard entered, his face cold, his eyes flashing with irritation and suspicion. Looking around, he immediately sensed something was wrong. "What the hell is going on here? Why wasn't I told about this meeting?" Margaret rose, keeping her voice calm and gentle. "Richard, please, sit down. We have something very important to discuss." He eyed her warily before lowering himself into a chair, scanning the room with open mistrust. Jessica spoke, her tone gentle but firm, as she looked her father in the eye. "Dad, everyone here is deeply concerned about your health. We need to have an honest conversation about you getting checked by a doctor right away." Richard's hand slammed down on the table, his eyes blazing, his voice thundering. "So that's what this is. A pathetic little ambush? You all think I'm some senile old fool?" James Reynolds, a senior board member, spoke in a calm but resolute voice. "Richard, we only want what's best for you and for the company. It's clear you've been experiencing serious health issues lately, and we can't keep ignoring them." Richard turned on James, his glare full of contempt and hostility. "And who the hell do you think you are, telling me what to do? Don't forget who built this empire. I don't need advice, especially not from a bunch of useless ingrates like you." The other directors stayed silent, exchanging uneasy glances. Margaret stepped closer to Richard, her voice soft and pleading. "Please, calm down. We're doing this because we care about you. If you agree to go to the hospital now, things could still turn out fine." He swung toward her, his face flushed, his voice trembling with rage. "Care? You're humiliating me in front of everyone. I said I'm fine, and that's final. Don't you dare defy me again, Margaret." Outside the half-closed door, Anna stood motionless, heart pounding as she watched. Richard's symptoms were more pronounced than ever. His hands shook violently, his breathing was rapid, and beads of sweat gathered on his forehead. The illness was reaching a dangerous peak. Jessica kept her composure, her voice steady but urgent. "Dad, please stop being stubborn. Your condition is extremely dangerous. If you don't listen, you could be gambling with your life." Richard shot to his feet, trembling as he pointed a finger in her face, shouting, "Shut up! I have no daughter like you! Traitor!" The air in the room turned to ice. Jessica froze, the hurt in her eyes deep and raw, tears threatening to spill. Margaret pulled her daughter into an embrace, speaking through her own pain. "Richard, have you completely lost your mind? Jessica is our daughter. You're hurting the very people who love you most." Richard swayed, his eyes clouded with confusion, his voice weakening but still defiant. "No, I'm not crazy. You're all the ones who are crazy." Suddenly, he clutched his head in agony. His legs buckled, and to everyone's shock, he collapsed onto the cold floor. "Richard!" Margaret cried out in panic, rushing to his side. Jessica knelt beside her father, checking for vital signs. Anna burst into the room, all hesitation and past resentment forgotten. She knelt down, feeling for Richard's pulse, and addressed Margaret firmly. "Mrs. Brooks, he's having a major stroke or severe neurological event. We need to call an ambulance immediately." Margaret's hands shook as she dialed for emergency services, tears streaming down her pale face. Anna quietly assisted Jessica in stabilizing Richard, her focus unwavering. Somewhere deep inside, she clung to the hope that this moment might finally wake the man who had spent years rejecting her help. But the question loomed. Would this tense, desperate intervention be enough to save Richard's life? Or would his pride and stubbornness drive him to a tragic end from which there was no return? The ambulance wailed as it sped into the Brooks estate, red lights flashing across the windows like a dire warning to everyone inside. In the opulent living room, Richard still lay motionless on the cold floor, his breathing shallow, his face ashen. Margaret clung to Jessica, both trembling as the paramedics rushed in and lifted Richard onto the stretcher. Anna stood quietly to the side, her heart pounding, hands still trembling from the tension. Just as the medics wheeled Richard toward the waiting ambulance, Margaret turned to Anna, her eyes filled with gratitude and worry. "Anna, thank you for helping. Without you and Jessica, I truly don't know what I would have done." Anna replied softly, her voice low but resolute. "Mrs. Brooks, I think you should know something important before you get to the hospital." Margaret's eyes widened, curiosity and concern flickering across her face. "What is it?" Anna drew in a deep breath, summoning her courage to meet Margaret's gaze. "The anonymous letter you received, it was from me. I've been documenting Mr. Brooks's symptoms in detail for weeks. I sent it not only to you, but also to the company's board of directors, hoping they would act. But they all ignored it, dismissing it as the baseless imagination of an untrustworthy maid." Margaret froze, her expression shifting from surprise to shock, struggling to process the revelation. You're serious, Anna? The board knew about this?" Anna nodded, her voice heavy. "Yes, ma'am, I did everything I could to save Mr. Brooks, but he refused, and the board, afraid of upsetting him, stayed silent. His pride and stubbornness have brought us to this point." Margaret stood rooted in place, tears streaming down her pale face. Jessica pulled her close, gently urging, "Mom, we'll deal with this later. Right now, we need to be at the hospital with Dad." Margaret nodded, quickly wiping her tears. She and Jessica climbed into the ambulance, but before leaving, she turned to Anna once more, her eyes a mix of pain and deep gratitude. "Anna, will you come with us? I think Richard owes you a sincere apology when he wakes up." Anna gave a small nod, feeling a weight lift from her heart. Finally, the Brooks family saw what she had tried to do all along. At the hospital, Richard was rushed into a specialized emergency unit. Doctors and nurses moved quickly, ordering urgent brain scans and tests. In the waiting room, Margaret, Jessica, and Anna sat together in tense silence. Nearly an hour later, the head of neurology, Dr. Jonathan Harris, emerged, his face grave. He approached Margaret and Jessica, speaking with careful clarity. "Mrs. Brooks, I've reviewed your husband's MRI and all test results. His condition is extremely serious. He has a severe cerebral aneurysm, which could be fatal at any moment if not operated on immediately." Margaret trembled, clutching Jessica for support as fresh tears welled in her eyes. "Doctor, can he survive this?" Dr. Harris nodded gently, his voice holding a thread of hope, but also warning. "We're lucky he was brought in on time, a few minutes later, and it might have been too late. But this surgery is still complex and risky. We'll do everything we can." Margaret gripped Jessica's hand, drawing in a steadying breath. Then she turned to Anna, who stood quietly nearby. Her eyes now held remorse and sincerity. "Anna, I'm sorry for everything you've endured from Richard and this family. You tried to save his life despite the way you were treated. I can't thank you enough." Anna smiled gently, her reply warm but firm. "Ma'am, I was only doing my duty. I could never turn away when someone's health was in danger, no matter how they treated me." Overcome, Margaret embraced Anna, genuine gratitude pouring from her heart. Jessica stepped forward too, taking Anna's hand with admiration and affection. When Richard was wheeled into emergency surgery, Margaret and Jessica sat together in the waiting area. Anna sat a little apart, silently willing him to survive the dangerous procedure, to have the chance to make things right. In that moment, the painful truth lay bare. Richard's arrogance and disregard for his own health, combined with the fear and cowardice of the board, had brought him to the brink of death. And yet, the person he had deemed worthless was the very one who had pulled him back from the edge. The question remained. Once this crisis passed, would Richard truly awaken to his mistakes? Or would he sink back into the same cycle of pride and prejudice that had almost cost him everything? The steady beeping of the heart monitor pulsed softly through the stark white hospital room, slowly pulling Richard back to consciousness after hours of surgery. His head throbbed dully, his eyelids heavy, but as the dim light came into focus, he realized he was lying in a hospital bed, his body weak, helpless in a way he had never felt before. His clouded gaze drifted around the room until he saw Margaret and Jessica sitting quietly at his side, their faces a mixture of relief and lingering worry. "Margaret, Jessica," he rasped, his voice hoarse and frail. Where am I?" Margaret hurried to his bedside, gently taking his hand, her voice trembling with emotion. "You're in the hospital, Richard. You just had emergency surgery for a severe brain aneurysm. The doctor said if we'd waited even a little longer, you wouldn't have made it." Richard frowned in pain as memories came rushing back. The tense meeting, his uncontrolled anger, the crushing headache that sent him collapsing to the floor. And then, clearer than all else, he remembered Anna, the maid he had looked down on, checking his pulse with urgency, calling for help with the calm precision of a professional. His voice wavered with surprise and confusion. "Anna, what did she do when I collapsed?" Jessica met her father's eyes, her tone firm yet tinged with compassion. Anna was the first to respond. She recognized you were having a major stroke and called for an ambulance immediately. If it hadn't been for her, you wouldn't be here now." Jessica's words cut deep into Richard's pride. Shame flooded him as he recalled every insult, every dismissive glance he'd ever thrown at Anna. The woman he had deemed beneath him, worthless, had been the one to save his life. The truth was as humbling as it was painful. I need to see Anna," Richard whispered, regret heavy in his voice. "I need to apologize to her." Margaret nodded gently, though hesitation lingered in her eyes. "Richard, I don't think it's the right moment. Anna's endured a great deal from you. She may need time." Richard turned his face away, the weight of guilt and helplessness pressing harder than any physical pain. For the first time in his life, he truly saw the consequences of his arrogance and prejudice, and the realization hurt more than the illness itself. In the days that followed, Richard repeatedly asked to see Anna, but she politely declined each time. She didn't want his apology to come too easily. She needed him to truly understand the harm his behavior had caused. She continued working in the mansion quietly, avoiding direct contact, but still kept Margaret and Jessica updated on his health. While Richard wrestled with guilt, a more public crisis erupted. News that the powerful CEO of a prestigious pharmaceutical company had nearly died from ignoring his health and from dismissing warnings from his own employee quickly leaked. Major outlets and social media exploded with headlines. "Billionaire CEO almost dies from arrogance, ignores employees' warnings, and discrimination in Brooks Corporation puts CEO on death's door." The company's reputation took a crushing hit, its stock price plummeting. The board of directors scrambled to convene emergency meetings, but the damage was already done. James Reynolds, the CFO, and other senior leaders who had ignored Anna's reports were grilled by shareholders and the press, forced to admit their failures. The shame of their inaction couldn't be erased. Margaret and Jessica watched in pain as the company Richard had built over a lifetime came under siege. They faced the media, promising reforms and change, but the loss of trust and credibility was far too deep to repair overnight. From his hospital bed, Richard followed each news report with a heavy heart. He understood, with stark clarity, his responsibility for the collapse. He remembered every time he'd dismissed Anna's warnings, every time he'd humiliated her in public. This late awakening stung far worse than the illness that had nearly killed him. In those long, restless days, Richard came to realize that a simple apology would never be enough. He would have to prove, through real action, that he had changed, if he had any hope of making amends. But could these newfound intentions heal the deep wounds he'd inflicted? And would Anna, after enduring so much prejudice and pain from him, ever be willing to accept a sincere apology from the man who had once looked down on her more than anyone else? As the first turbulent days passed, the story of Richard Brooks and the maid he had once scorned spread rapidly across the country. Major news outlets covered it relentlessly, turning the incident into a powerful symbol against racism and toxic arrogance in corporate culture. Richard, once a symbol of success and power, had now become the focal point of harsh public criticism. Articles, television reports, and in-depth social media analyses laid bare the CEO's disregard for human life, his dangerous stubbornness, and the arrogance that had driven him to the brink of death. The story of Anna Washington, a black woman who had been humiliated and belittled by this wealthy man, yet became the only person brave enough to save him, only amplified the bitter irony and cruelty of the deep-rooted racial bias within major corporations. Under immense public pressure, the Brooks Pharmaceuticals Board of Directors had no choice but to hold a public press conference to address the scandal. Senior executives who had ignored Anna's clear warnings, Most notably, CFO James Morrison and head of HR Sandra Phillips were now at the center of growing public outrage. Both were heavily condemned in the press for dismissing Anna's accurate medical reports purely because of racial prejudice and their fear of Richard's authoritarian power. Leaked recordings from past meetings revealed Sandra and James belittling Anna's concerns and even suggesting she be fired for making a fuss over nothing. Within a week, the board was forced to terminate both Morrison and Phillips from their senior management positions, citing gross negligence, lack of professional ethics, and violations of the company's core values. The company also pledged sweeping reforms, with a strong emphasis on implementing diversity policies to prevent future discrimination. Meanwhile, Richard lay in his hospital bed, his heart aching with each news update about the company. What he had once considered the pinnacle of his life's work was now collapsing under the weight of public scrutiny and justice. But what tormented him most was the deep remorse he felt for his cruelty and prejudice toward Anna, the one person who had had the courage to save him when everyone else turned away. Anna Washington quickly became a national figure. Journalists and television networks competed to secure exclusive interviews with her, offering substantial fees. The company even sent lawyers to propose a generous settlement to ease public anger. But Anna politely declined every offer. One afternoon, Margaret sought Anna out in her small basement room in the mansion. She looked at the woman before her, calmly packing personal belongings as though ready to leave at any moment. "Anna, I don't know how to express the gratitude my family and I feel for you," Margaret said, her voice filled with heartfelt emotion. "I know you've turned down every offer of compensation and media interviews, but let me ask you one last time. Are you sure you don't want to accept anything at all?" Anna paused, meeting Margaret's gaze with a voice that was firm yet gentle. "Ma'am, I don't want money or fame. The only thing I hope comes from this is that it wakes people up, to make them realize the terrible consequences of discrimination. I want everyone to understand that a person's value and dignity don't depend on their status, skin color, or occupation. If society can change the way it sees people, that will be the greatest reward I could ask for." Margaret's eyes glistened with tears as she looked at Anna. A deep sense of respect and admiration swelled within her for the woman who had taught her family such a powerful lesson about compassion and human dignity. In the days that followed, Anna quietly left the Brooks mansion and returned to her simple life. She stayed away from the spotlight, but her image and her story continued to inspire across social media. People spoke of Anna as the truest example of courage, dignity, and selflessness in the face of injustice. As for Richard, he now understood that to truly atone for his actions, he needed more than a sincere apology to Anna. He would have to use his painful experience to fight for equality and dismantle the dangerous prejudices he had once embodied. But did Richard have the courage to step out of the shadow he had created, face Anna, and truly change? And would these hard-earned lessons be powerful enough to transform an entire system that had long devalued people like Anna? Time passed quickly, but the story of Anna Washington and Richard Brooks continued to leave a powerful mark on the American public. 6 months after the scandal that shook the nation, Anna received unexpected news. She would be awarded the prestigious National Courage and Integrity Award for her bravery, dignity, and unwavering stance against injustice and social prejudice. The award ceremony was held at the Kennedy Center, one of America's most renowned and distinguished cultural landmarks. High-ranking officials, representatives from human rights organizations, social activists, and thousands of citizens gathered in the Grand Hall, eager to see in person the woman who had become a powerful symbol in the fight against racism. Before the event began, Anna stood quietly backstage, her eyes glancing down at the maid's uniform she had worn for years while serving the Brooks family. Today, that same simple uniform, once dismissed and looked down upon, would be donated to the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., to stand as a symbolic artifact against discrimination and as a reminder that dignity and compassion are never limited by social status or skin color. Meanwhile, Richard sat silently among the honored guests below the stage, his mind unsettled. This was the first time he would face his own weakness, mistakes, and deep guilt before the public. Over the past months, he had truly changed, spending long hours reflecting on his life, the harm he had caused, and the path to making amends. Even so, shame and regret still weighed heavily on him with every passing moment. The stage lights came up suddenly, the announcer's voice ringing clearly, pulling him back to the present. Ladies and gentlemen, the woman we honor today has reminded all of America that a person's worth is never defined by the color of their skin or their status. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Anna Washington. Thunderous applause erupted throughout the hall, and the audience rose in respect and admiration as Anna slowly walked to the podium. She wore a simple yet elegant outfit, her gaze calm and confident, a far cry from the woman once treated with contempt. Looking out into the crowd, Anna saw Margaret and Jessica smiling proudly. Then her eyes met Richard's, this man who had once belittled and insulted her countless times, now sitting silently with his head bowed in genuine remorse. In her heart stirred a feeling she couldn't quite name, not hatred, not anger, but peace and forgiveness. Anna took a deep breath and began, her voice clear and moving. Ladies and gentlemen, I never imagined I would stand here today. I simply did what was right, what anyone should do when they see another person in danger. Sadly, I had to do it in silence, in the shadows, because my skin color and my job were seen as less than in the eyes of some. The hall fell, completely silent, every ear tuned to her words. For much of my life, I was an experienced nurse, but for speaking out against prejudice, I lost everything. I became a maid, and it was then that I truly understood how discrimination can exist quietly, yet so cruelly. I was treated as invisible, without worth. Yet from that invisible place I was able to save an important life, the life of someone who once looked down on me. Her eyes found Richard again, and her tone softened with compassion. I don't tell this story for praise, and not to make anyone feel ashamed. I tell it so we all understand one truth. Dignity, compassion, and human capability are never defined by status or skin color. They come from the heart and the courage within each of us. Applause swelled again, and many in the audience wiped away tears at her sincerity. This uniform, Anna gestured toward the maid's outfit displayed behind her, does not just represent the job I once had. It is a powerful symbol against societal prejudice. I hope that from today on, whenever people see it, they will remember that every person's worth is equal. She closed her speech with a heartfelt appeal, her voice gentle but resolute. I forgive those who hurt me, but I hope none of us ever forget this lesson. Let's work together to build a society where no one has to endure the pain of prejudice or discrimination. As Anna stepped down from the stage, the applause roared louder than ever. Richard rose to his feet, his heart heavy with deep regret, his eyes glistening as he looked straight at Anna and gave a small, sincere nod, a silent apology more meaningful than any words. Anna returned the gesture with a gentle smile. In that moment, she knew that true change had begun in the heart of the man who had once hurt her the most. But would Richard's emotional awakening be enough to erase the wounds of the past? And would the path he chose after this day truly redeem the harm he had done to Anna and to so many others? After the final round of warm applause faded and the audience gradually left the hall, Anna stood alone in a corner backstage, her gaze fixed on the maid's uniform being carefully handled and packed away by museum staff. She was deep in thought when a familiar, hesitant voice spoke from behind her. "Anna, would you give me a few minutes to talk?" She turned to see Richard standing there, his shoulders slightly hunched, his eyes uncertain. He no longer resembled the powerful, arrogant CEO she had once known. Instead, he looked smaller, frailer, every line of his face etched with sincere regret. Anna's reply was calm, without a trace of anger. "Yes, Mr. Brooks, we can talk." They stepped into a quiet hallway, away from the remaining crowd. A heavy, awkward silence lingered for a few seconds before Richard broke it, his voice trembling but more genuine than she had ever heard it. "Anna, I know any apology now is probably too late, and will never be enough to make up for the harm I've caused you. But I need you to know, I truly regret everything. I blinded myself with arrogance and prejudice, unable to see the truth right in front of me, that you were the person most worthy of respect in my home." He took a deep breath, his eyes reddening with both sincerity and pain. "I've thought a lot about what happened, and I understand you have every right not to forgive me. But I still want to thank you, from the bottom of my heart, for saving my life when I never deserved it." Anna met his gaze with gentleness, no trace of bitterness left in her eyes. She spoke slowly, her voice soft but resolute. "Mr. Brooks, I forgive you. But understand this, I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for myself, and for the oath I swore long ago as a nurse, to save lives without judgment of who they are, what they've done, or how they've treated me." Richard lowered his head, moved by the honesty in her words. He realized he was standing before a woman whose dignity and compassion went far beyond anything he had imagined. Anna's tone deepened. "I believe anyone can change, and if your change is sincere, it will matter. But you must remember, change isn't just words of regret, it's action." Richard lifted his head, a new determination in his eyes that replaced the doubt and arrogance of before. "I understand, Anna. I promise you. I'll spend the rest of my life proving that this change is real. I'll do everything I can to create a truly fair and equal workplace, so no one ever has to endure what you went through." Anna allowed a small smile, sensing for the first time a deep sincerity in his words. She nodded, her gaze encouraging. "I believe you, Mr. Brooks, and I hope your promises won't just remain words, but become real actions that make lasting change in our society." They stood there for a while longer, saying nothing more. The silence was no longer awkward or tense. It was filled with peace and mutual understanding. Finally, Richard extended his hand. Anna hesitated for a moment, then gently took it. A handshake of true reconciliation and forgiveness. As Richard walked away, he felt as though a massive weight had been lifted from his soul. The mistakes and wrongs of his past would always remain as scars, but now he knew he had a chance to start over, to live a life with more meaning, compassion, and responsibility. Anna remained in the hallway, her eyes looking into the distance, her heart lighter than it had been in years. There was no resentment left, because she understood that the true power of forgiveness didn't lie in revenge or punishment, but in helping someone recognize their own mistakes. That day, both Anna and Richard knew this was only the beginning of a long journey ahead, one they would walk on separate paths, yet toward the same goal, to bring about meaningful, lasting change in the world. But would the path Richard had just pledged to follow be as straightforward as he imagined? And Anna, now a symbol of dignity and compassion, would she be ready to keep walking the difficult, demanding road of fighting for justice and equality, knowing how many trials still lay ahead? In the years following their emotional conversation backstage at the Kennedy Center, the lives of Anna and Richard took completely new directions. Though each chose a separate path, both pursued the same noble goal: healing the societal wounds caused by discrimination and injustice. Anna used donations from human rights and charitable organizations to establish fully free community hospitals in underserved neighborhoods and minority communities across the United States. No longer the quiet maid enduring contempt, Anna had become an inspiring leader, constantly busy with projects in education, healthcare, and the training of young, talented, and passionate doctors from communities that had long been overlooked. The first community hospital Anna built stood in the poor neighborhood where she had grown up. Every day, she spent time speaking personally with patients, holding their hands in encouragement, her eyes always filled with hope and trust. Young people from minority communities, especially Black students, looked to Anna as a living symbol of resilience, dignity, and compassion. Under her dedicated guidance, many received scholarships to prestigious medical schools and went on to become responsible doctors and nurses serving their own communities. Meanwhile, Richard, after officially stepping down as CEO of Brooks Pharmaceuticals, devoted the rest of his life to charitable work. For the first time, he shed all the power, status, and wealth to live a simpler, more genuine life, dedicating himself fully to communities he had once ignored, whether intentionally or not. Richard founded the Second Chance Community Health Foundation, providing substantial funding for free healthcare programs, particularly in predominantly African American and minority neighborhoods. Each morning, he personally visited the community hospitals funded by his foundation, speaking directly with patients and medical staff to better understand the real challenges they faced. He was no longer the polished, commanding CEO, but a humble man with deep compassion, always willing to listen and help those in need. Often, he drove himself to impoverished neighborhoods, spending hours alongside volunteer doctors providing free care for the elderly, children, and the homeless, people he had once never truly seen. One afternoon, while assisting at a free clinic in one of the hospitals Anna had founded, Richard unexpectedly ran into her. Standing among the long lines of waiting patients, they exchanged a gentle, understanding smile. "You've done incredible things, Anna," Richard said softly, his eyes full of genuine respect. "And so have you, Mr. Brooks," Anna replied, her voice gentle, yet carrying a quiet strength. "You really have changed. I can see it clearly." Richard nodded silently, his eyes glistening with sincerity. "Everything I'm doing now comes from the lesson you taught me, Anna. A lesson about dignity, compassion, and human worth. I hope that one day the harm I caused you might be eased, even just a little, by these actions." Anna looked at him with warmth and empathy. "I think that's already happened, Mr. Brooks. The most important thing is that you've awakened and are spreading those values to so many others. That's the truest form of atonement." They stood side by side, looking out at the crowd waiting for help, people who had been abandoned or forgotten by society. In that moment, both realized that though they came from entirely different worlds, their lives now intersected at the deepest point of all: compassion, forgiveness, and the desire to create change from the very prejudices and mistakes of the past. From that day forward, Anna and Richard, once symbols of two separate worlds, traveled together across the country, appearing at educational forums, international human rights conferences, and television programs to share their story. It was no longer just a personal event, but a powerful message that spread far and wide, touching the hearts of millions of Americans and urging them to join in building a just society where human dignity is always valued and protected. The prejudices, mistakes, and wounds of the past remained as a bittersweet reminder, but no longer as sources of pain. They became valuable lessons, making both Anna and Richard stronger on the road ahead. In the end, their story proved one thing. The deepest change never comes from power or wealth, but from understanding, compassion, and the limitless capacity to forgive within each of us. Only then can people truly step out of the shadows of outdated prejudice and reach for a brighter, more humane future. One where we are all equal, and where each person's true worth is defined by their heart and their actions. The story of Anna and Richard shows clearly that compassion and forgiveness can overcome any prejudice or barrier in society. Sometimes, the person we least expect is the one who saves our life in the most extraordinary way. Have you ever witnessed or experienced a situation where prejudice completely changed someone's life? Share your experience in the comments below. Don't forget to like and share this meaningful story with others, and especially to subscribe so you won't miss our next heartfelt stories. Thank you for being with us, and see you in the next video.